Okay, so next game that we need to talk about, and this one is just fascinating to me because in terms of the winner, we picked accurately. In terms of how the game was going to play out, we both had a big old whiff. Actually, me more than you. I think you said there was going to be some more points in the game. I don't think you anticipated this final score. So we're talking about LSU and A&M in a game that, to put the phrase barn burner and LSU game in the same sentence feels kind of weird to me, but when you have a 54-39 score, that's kind of what you got. So I do want to talk a little bit about the coaching and the storylines, but before we get into that, can we talk a little bit about just what in the hell happened if you didn't see this game and you just looked up the next morning and saw 54-39 in the final score? Let me know what happened.
I think A&M has reverted to their inability to stop the run. Period. It was just mounting momentum, and it was a tremendous number of drives too, and it just allowed things to build. The first thing I think that's worth touching on is the drive issue. We've talked about this early in the year, particularly against Louisville, who's dropped one to Kentucky. And the statement I made about Louisville was, everything they did and all the scores they put up and everything was because they ran a tremendous number of possessions. Their percentage of drives with scores wasn't really all that high. It's just they had so darn many possessions in a game because basically they would either go 3 and out or they would score, and they tended to stop the other team quickly, playing very aggressive defense, that they would score 6 times out of 10 drives in the first half, where most teams would have 10 drives in an entire game. First, we had a similar-ish situation here. There's just a lot of possessions. I think it was 14 possessions by Texas A&M. And I think the same number for LSU. So, if you have the ball 14 times, it's not really that hard to put up 39 points, as crazy as that is, because that means you've only scored in about 1 in 3 possessions. So that's the first thing. If you only have 10 possessions in a ball game, by the way, which is sort of normal, 10 to 12, scoring on a third of your possessions puts up about 20 points to 30 points. And that's pretty normal. When you have it 14 times, you can score on a third of your possessions and put up 40. And likewise, LSU, 54 points, all touchdowns, right? They weren't settling for field goals except for just one early in the ball game. Again, I mean, it's just too many times touching the football, in large part because the drives were ending quickly. Let's sort of flip back here and look at how the scoring drives went in the second quarter. A&M kicks a field goal in 4 plays. LSU scores a touchdown on 5. A&M turnover and downs in 6. Touchdown in 4 plays. Touchdown in 8. Touchdown in 9. Touchdown in 6. Touchdown in 7. Touchdown in 4. Over and over and over and over again. We talked about in our Alabama recap, Alabama only punted twice in the ball game against Auburn. LSU punted 3 times in the first half and put up 54 points. And again, they punted again in the second half too. They just had the ball that much. And, without trying to beat it any further, it did get away from them. LSU obviously did score a lot of touchdowns in the game. Importantly, nobody was really turning the ball over, and that has a huge effect on a lot of scores. But way too many possessions. It really exhausted both defenses. And there was no doubt, right? I mean, it was 27 game at the end of the first half and seemed pretty normal. And the reason it just exploded into what was a 34-32 game in the second half was because there were so many possessions and so many plays run that both teams just kind of exhausted themselves.
What was interesting to me is, what have we said about Trevor Knight all year? He's about a 50% passer, 6.5 yards per attempt. Well, he comes back from injury, hops onto this game, 14 of 30 for 7 yards an attempt, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, which is great. but he's still not playing at a highly efficient level. So I think some of, as much as it's an amazing feat to score 39 against LSU, they got themselves in a hole in the first half and never really recovered. What I did find interesting was that Keith Ford and Travion Williams kind of went off in this game, combined 168 yards on only 25 carries. And obviously, the big monster in the room is Geis and his giant game. But talk about how A&M could have this kind of success running the ball against an LSU defense that really, in terms of yards per carry, hasn't given up anything to anybody, and neither Ford or Williams had like that 85 yarder that would throw the stats off. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what did A&M do to kind of take advantage of LSU, or was this just one of those weird, tonight's a track meet kind of night and we're going to have some aberrations in our numbers?
From what I saw, I honestly think it was the second. I think it was sort of a track meet kind of night. If you go back and look at the stats for the first half, I don't know that A&M had a run longer than 6 yards in the entire first half. Okay, so it wasn't like they started strong and had consistent success. Yeah, I am pretty sure they all the runs were under 6 yards, except for I think one scramble by Trevor Knight. He got a first down early in their first scoring drive. But beyond that, A&M scores one touchdown in the first quarter, and it's otherwise punt, 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 fumble. I mean, just constantly turning the ball over. The issue was they got into the second half, got a little bit of rhythm. LSU was scoring, and I think two things happened. One, I think LSU's defense sort of let off the gas. Two, even to that point, even all the way into the end of the third quarter, A&M had their first run of 7 yards or more with 5 minutes left in the third quarter of this ball game. Okay, so this is a team that's going to have two backs averaging 7 yards per carry, and they have not had one until about the start of the fourth quarter. And at that point, it became a track meet. Now, there's two things that contribute to this. The first is, and we've hit on this a lot, if you don't have many snaps, or let's say with the backs, the running backs did not have very many touches at all for most of this ball game. And they're throwing the ball side to side, right, running RPOs. So LSU's just running all over the field, back and forth, back and forth. All those bubble screens that you run or RPO plays, that makes the defense have to chase they try to get in the backfield, and then the quarterback's bootlegged, so now they have to turn, run, chase him. They throw a bubble screen. Okay, now I got to turn upfield and chase the receiver. It's a tremendous amount of running. It's very exhausting. That's why a lot of teams like A&M, like Auburn, Ole Miss, Alabama, run those plays a lot. Especially in the first half, as it wears somebody out. But you don't have any touches to the running backs, so their average is, even though they were averaging probably 3-4 yards a carry at that point, they had so few touches that at the end of the day, it ended up being pretty statistically meaningless. The issue was once you hit the fourth quarter and A&M, started to pick up steam. They were already, LSU's up 41-17, right? So LSU's kind of calling off the dogs at that start of the fourth quarter. They don't have a lot of the fresh faces in. And all of a sudden, with a lot of backups on the field, with the guys being pretty tired because they've played a long game with a lot of snaps, A&M starts devoting themselves to the run game. And it was really, honestly, about the middle of the fourth quarter where A&M starts gashing them for 30-yard runs and 40-yard runs, that all the statistics for the running backs came to pass, because honestly, before then, they really weren't very effective. Most everything came, as you noted, from the passing game, which may not have had a good yard per attempt average, but it, they got a lot of chunk plays. They were converting drives, and really, as we said, it's better to have 3 drives where everything works than 10 drives where a third of things work. A&M had a lot of drives early in the game where nothing worked, and at the end of the game when LSU got tired, they had a lot of successful plays in a row and let them put up points. But it is pretty deceptive because the game was 41-17 at the start of the fourth quarter. I really think LSU just let off the gas. If they did the same thing, by the way, against Mississippi State early in the year, right? And Mississippi State made the change in quarterback, and everybody was saying, well, why do they keep playing Fitzgerald? Look at Williams and look how good he is. Well, it's like, well, is that really what happened, or was it that LSU's up 3 scores and their defense just lacked the mental focus to play at a high level? I think that's what we saw here. LSU let off the gas. A&M decided to be physical. They've come from behind enough over the years to kind of know how to do it. But, honestly, even 54-39, 2-score game, this game really wasn't that close. A&M just started scoring quickly at the end of the game in hurry up mode, and LSU kind of let it happen. But I really think that it's a repeat of everything we've seen from A&M really every year past 2012. That they don't have the size and physicality on defense for whatever reason. I think it's inexplicable at this point. LSU was really able to just pound them with guys, 7.7 yards per carry. They had no answer, and LSU just continually accumulated points. And even when A&M was coming back, right, a 22-point fourth quarter, LSU scored 20 in the fourth quarter. And a lot of the reason that A&M, quote unquote, came back was LSU themselves were scoring so fast at the end of that ball game that, again, A&M ended up with a lot of possessions. That's how they kept up. And to me, that pretty much is the entire story of this ball game.
So it's interesting because we touched on this last week, how the perception of A&M right now as a team is that they had just a total cluster this year. But if you look at it, they're sitting at 8-4. They're fourth in the West, which isn't great in terms of bowl slots, but it really is. Now that we've seen them take on this final loss in the final week, it really is exactly what you said last week. Our perceptions are so colored by what's happened down the stretch that we feel like A&M is an awful team, and we don't think about them as being an 8-4 team who will maybe go to a decent bowl. So, talk little bit about that in terms of their bowl prospects and being able to get a win in a bowl game as an 8-4 team that went 0-4 in their last 4 SEC games. Do they have enough left in the tank and enough in terms of personnel and scheme and coaching and everything else to get a win against an 8-4 team from a Big 12 or a Big 10?
A lot of that's going to depend on injury. There's no doubt that Trevor Knight, even in this game, right? I think it's maybe even a different game if Trevor Knight has a healthy shoulder. It was pretty obvious from the opening snap of the Mississippi State game that he wasn't right, and it's carried on from there. But I think the bigger deal is actually defensively. Myles Garrett has been a good player this year. He really hasn't been a great one, frankly. And it's no fault of his own. He's just been too banged up. We really only, I felt like the first half of that Alabama game, he was healthy and it was a different player coming off a bye week. And before then, maybe a little bit early, and, maybe the Auburn game, he had some flashes. But for the most part, he's been probably 60% all year. And if he has a few weeks to rest that ankle, assuming he still wants to play, given his draft status at a high level with a high motor, that'll make a big impact. I think the linebackers going out has made a huge impact for their team. I think a loss of Amarni Watts was devastating, and they've had losses at corner. So I think A&M at 8-4 is probably going to end up in a decent bowl. They're going to end up with some decent matchups. We'll probably talk about more of this in bowl season, but one of the advantages SEC teams are going to have is you've got, A&M at fourth in the West. They're going to get matched up with probably another team that's, say, fourth in their division or what have you in another conference, because they're probably going to be what, fifth or sixth pick in the SEC. Right. There's a chance SEC's may or may not. Well, they should get two teams in the New Year's Six bowls, but there's going to be a lot of conferences with 2-3 teams in those New Year's Six bowls, and who are they going to end up facing? You think it's real easy to look back at A&M and go, wow, they had a really rough year, but the SEC really is a lot more parity than anyone's giving them credit for. And if you want to say, who is like the fifth best team in another conference, even the ACC, it's probably North Carolina, Virginia Tech. That's who they'd play. If you're looking at the Big 12, it's probably TCU or Kansas State. In the Big 10, maybe Nebraska. I mean, that's what they're looking at in a bowl game, and I have to think A&M, when healthy, is probably 2 or 3 scores better than all those teams. So I think there's a lot of potential to end on a very positive note.
What about LSU in terms of? I honestly think that it sucks for them that they had to eliminate a game from the schedule, so 7-4 doesn't look nearly as good as 8-4. And then obviously dropping that one to Florida really colors the perception of this LSU team in a different light. I could see them getting in a bowl with a team that's completely outmatched, like just because of those close losses and having a loss on your schedule from an Alabama who's going to beat anybody this year. A 7-4 LSU team might actually be a 10-1, or sorry, 11-1, 10-2 type team in another league. So could you see a situation where LSU got a bowl draw against someone that would be a really favorable matchup for the Tigers?
Yeah, I could. Again, I was saying A&M is going to finish something like fifth. LSU theoretically should be ranked sixth just on overall record. I don't know that that will actually happen, but yeah, it's the same deal. They're looking at the same general crop of teams. I just while we're sitting here talking, Google like Cherry Palm. And he has them in the Outback Bowl, and they're going to play Nebraska.
Oh, they'd kill Nebraska.
I mean, is there any doubt that LSU would absolutely yeah, they have LSU versus Nebraska and A&M versus Kansas State. So I think you kind of have to take a step back and realize, the SEC, for all the talk about how terrible it is, we've had a lot of discussions. If anybody didn't check out our Big Ten video and is an SEC fan and wants to hear us rail on scheduling and the way all that plays out, go watch our what we had a preview for the Ohio State Michigan game. And what we talked about a lot in that game was the SEC has a lot more parity than is being given credit for. Everybody has 8 wins because everybody in the SEC has been beating each other. But what that means is there's going to be a lot of teams that have 8-4 records in other conferences, like Kansas State, that you're going to get mashed up in these bowl games, and all of a sudden, the bowl games aren't how good you are or how bad you are. Frankly, you're a conference's bowl record. Usually, it's more about where your team's slotted too high or too low. Other conferences are going to have teams slotted a lot, way too high, and you're going to have a lot of really good SEC teams slotted in lower bowls. But everybody's going to be kind of disappointed with their bowl slot. But there's a silver lining in that teams, you're going to have a lot of Nebraska versus LSU like bowl games where, maybe LSU isn't quite where they wanted to land, but you end up with a really nice winnable ball game to really make a statement going into next year.